Hello, I'm Undead Waffle, and today I'm going to be continuing to read the OD&D rules. So this is part two. So if you have not seen part one, I recommend seeing that first. Um, and in this video, I'm going to be reading actually part of book three rather than the ending of book one or book two because of some specific reasons that I'll get into in a second. I think that after thinking about it for a little bit, I wanted to offer some retrospective notes on the first volume, which I read in part one. Mainly, I wanted to discuss things that were left out of the rules. So, we've come to be accustomed to certain conventions in Dungeons and Dragons. Um, Especially in the OSR, we notice that in BX, for instance, a lot of skill checks are made by rolling under your ability score. So, for example, a strength check would be rolling a d20 and trying to roll beneath your score. So, this character here has a strength of 6, intelligence of 11, wisdom of 13, right? So, if they're making a strength check, they're rolling a d20, trying to roll beneath 6, which is a 30% chance of success. Those rules are not to be found anywhere in OD&D. So we are left to figure out our own resolution mechanics, or figure out what these numbers mean independently. We're not told what these numbers exactly mean, but we're told that they correspond with about how well they perform in those abilities compared to an average person. So if you imagine 3d6, 9 or 10-ish would be about average, and much more above that would be above average, and below that would be below average. But they don't tell us how to use those numbers. So, in my opinion, if I was running D&D, OD&D, I would make it so that um, I would just have players erase their numbers at a certain point. I would have them write down their number. So strength is 6, intelligence is 11, wisdom is 13, constitution 12, dexterity 9, and charisma 8. And then what I would do personally is I would have certain ranges be considered average. So I would say maybe 7 to 11 would be considered average. So that means they have an average charisma, dexterity, and intelligence, and then they have below average strength and above average constitution and wisdom. And then maybe if I was thinking about it, I might have another band, so above 15 or below 6, let's just say, would be extremely above and extremely below average, respectively. And then I would just have them play describing what they want to do, and I'd say, oh, you know what, you have below average strength, so you're not gonna be able to do this on your own. However, your companion has above average strength. They can succeed if they try this. I would not make them roll ability scores. We don't find that in OD&D rules. However, of course, you can play however you want. They don't give us resolution mechanics, so you can figure out whatever you would like. So another thing I wanted to note is the demi-humans. So the demi-humans here are totally different than what we see in BX and in later editions. So in BX, the races are race as class. So you can choose to be a fighter, you can choose to be a magic user, you can choose to be a cleric, or you can choose to be a dwarf or an elf or a halfling. But we don't find that in OD&D. It doesn't work the exact same way. It seems like in OD&D, according to how it's written, picking a race other than human locks you into a certain class. So, for example, dwarves may only opt for the fighting class, so they can only be fighting men. Dwarves cannot be clerics, dwarves cannot be magic users. And likewise, elves are a sort of mix between fighting men and magic users, and they get to choose per session which they'd like to play. Halflings are fighting men, but they're kind of designed to be rangers because of they've got this magic resistance equal to dwarves, and it says they have deadly accuracy with missiles as detailed in chainmail. Now, I don't have the chainmail rules in front of me, but I'm going to assume, based on later editions, that whatever mechanics are used to resolve missile attacks, they have a bonus in. So in BX, for example, halflings have a higher dexterity, which allows them a bonus for missile attacks. Or maybe they just have a bonus applied based on their race as halflings. I can't quite recall off the top of my head. But either way, you can see that the races in OD&D are not exactly their own class, but they limit you to a specific class. I think that's interesting. I prefer this over the races class directly, because you can get into a lot of weird stuff talking about races class. You say all elves are this way. There's a lot of problems with that. There's a lot of discussions about that kind of thing, and this doesn't go too far away from that in fiction, but it at least is explaining that by being a elf, that's just not your class. It's not like they're a completely different kind of job than being a cleric or a fighting man or something. It's just, it's weird, but I kind of like this better than BX for game reasons more than for fiction reasons, I guess. But to each their own, and you can do however you'd like with your own game. So anyway, I figured for this video, I just wanted to look over part of book 3. Now, the reason I'm going through book 3 and not the remainder of book 1 or 2 is because the remainder of book 1 is a spell list. It's an explanation of spells. That's the only thing I didn't get to in here. And book 2 is a monster manual. So monsters and treasure. So it's just a whole bunch of monster stats, explanations, etc. And then at the end we talk about treasure, treasure tables, the value of different treasures. We got some magic items here, maps, whatever. And then here at the end we've got explanation of magic items. So we got magic swords. Let's see. We've got magic arrows, bows, potions, scrolls, rings, all that stuff. Miscellaneous magic item is always my favorite. But in any case, and at the end we've got precious metals, gems, and jewelry. But in any case, this is a whole bunch of tables and just blocks of text describing a thing, which I don't think would be particularly interesting for me to just read off from this book. And so I think will be more interesting for the remainder of book 1 and 2 would be a comparative read. So I am currently thinking that I might just do a comparative read where I'm comparing the spells from OD&D to, right now I'm thinking BX, since that's probably what most people are familiar with. Maybe I could throw in AD&D there, or maybe even 5th edition if people were interested. But currently that's my plan, is save the spells and monsters for a more comparative read, where I'm flipping between this book and the Moldvay set or whatever. I think that'd be more fruitful, and you could have a more interesting discussion based off the wording of the spell text and how the spells work and all that stuff. But if you have an opinion, if you prefer to see me just read them, feel free to leave that in the comments or whatever. But anyway, that being said, the 3rd volume is the Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. Now, I know the first book recommended you read them straight through, just 1, 2, and then 3, but we're doing our own thing here. So I like this illustration of a dragon, Underworld and Wilderness Adventures. Now I'm going to read this a little bit out of order again, because I think there's some other more interesting ways I could probably read these off to you guys. So don't expect me to just read this all straight through. I was looking over this earlier, and I think it'd probably be better for me to kind of organize this in a particular way, because I have some thoughts about a lot of this stuff. But like I said, feel free to leave in the comments someplace if you have an opinion of how I should read this stuff. So anyway, let's get into it. Dungeons & Dragons, rules for fantastic medieval war games, campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures. Book 3, The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. So here we've got a section on the Underworld and dungeon design. I'm going to leave out the sample dungeon because I definitely want to read sample dungeons. I want to make a video of sample dungeons from various editions at some point, comparing this maybe to the Tower of Xenopus or whatever. But anyway, I think this stuff here is interesting that I'll read all together at once. So, the Underworld. Before it is possible to conduct a campaign of adventures in the mazy dungeons, it is necessary for the referee to sit down with pencil in hand to draw these labyrinths on graph paper. Unquestionably, this will require a great deal of time and effort and imagination. The dungeons should look something like the example given below, with numerous levels which sprawl in all directions, not necessarily stacked neatly above each other in a straight line. And we have a graphic here where we see the first floor, second floor, third, fourth, fifth, and the sixth floor. And we've got all these interesting connections between them. We've got stairs leading up, stairs leading down, slides. You can see that, right off the bat, I'm going to note that there are 2 entrances to the dungeon, 2 different stairwells leading in. There's 2 entrances to the second floor, and the second floor connects to a separate part of the second floor via a slanting passage. Seems a little bit odd. I think it's meant to confuse mappers, because mapping is definitely a big part of old school D&D. The third floor, there's 2 entrances in there, and then the third floor can go into 3 different exits. So there's one way goes into 4th floor part A, another way that goes into 4th floor part B, and there is a chute that goes directly down to the 5th floor. That is another interesting aspect of old school dungeon design, is that you can have floors that will, or shortcuts that will lead you directly down multiple floors. And that's useful for players who have already been through, floors 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and they just want to get straight to floor 5 when they, as soon as possible when they enter the dungeon, rather than going all the way through floor 4 again or whatever. Or it can be used as a trap. Lots of different ways you can do that. And then they have floor 5.5 and 5 3/4, and then the final floor is the 6th floor, which is a cavern. Now the floor is 5.5, 5 3/4. I think they might just be making a joke here. I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's just a small mini floor or something like that. But whatever. In beginning a dungeon, it is advisable to construct at least 3 levels at once, noting where the stairs, trapdoors and chimneys, and slanting passages come out on lower levels, as well as where the mouths of chutes and teleportation terminals. In doing the lowest level of such a set, it is also necessary to leave space for the various methods of egress to still lower levels. A good dungeon will have no less than a dozen levels down, with offshoot levels in addition, and new levels under construction so that players will never grow tired of it. There's no real limit to the number of levels, nor is there any restriction on their size, other than the size of graph paper available. Greyhawk Castle, for example, has over a dozen levels in succession downwards, more than that number branching from these, and not less than 2 new levels under construction at any given time. These levels contain such things as a museum from another age, an underground lake, a series of caverns filled with giant fungi, a bowling alley for 20-foot-high giants, an arena of evil, crypts, and so on. And then they include here a sample dungeon level to kind of give an idea for the reader. Now, just some comments on all this stuff here. You can see that here they're talking about, you have 3 levels at once, and there's, a good dungeon will have no less than a dozen levels down, with offshoot levels and new levels under construction. So this is clearly talking about the mega dungeon style of play, which is not exactly the only way to play, but this is a way you can play Dungeons and Dragons nowadays. So in mega dungeon style play, you would, the campaign would all revolve around one mega dungeon with many, many, many floors, and the whole point would be to go as far as you can, and it's continuously getting deeper and deeper, and there's more levels being added over time. And as you can notice, he says Greyhawk Castle has over a dozen levels in succession, a whole bunch of branching levels, 2 levels under construction at any given time. So now, okay, question is, are those levels under construction in the fiction, or are those just in construction for the GM? Like, they don't even know the levels are under construction. They just are going to get there. Whenever they get there, it'll be done. It's not clear, but based on some other information that I've gathered from other sources, my assumption is that maybe they might have some doors that are locked. And then once the GM finishes designing, the dungeon level back there, they'll unlock the door, and you go to the dungeon, and suddenly the door is unlocked, and it leads downstairs to a whole new floor. So I guess this is a way you can talk about the mythic underworld. I'm not going to get too involved in that because I am not totally knowledgeable about mythic underworld stuff. However, I do know that basically the idea is that the underworld, the dungeon, is evil and almost sentient, and has almost a mind of its own. And it's got these magical properties that kind of explain the unexplainable, as it were. So, a dungeon just on its own generates new levels, or doors will unlock, and there's no rhyme or reason to these levels. So, like he says here, a museum for another age, an underground lake, series of caverns full of giant fungi, bowling alley even, arena of evil, crypts, and so on. So they don't have to be thematically unified. In fact, it seems like he's saying that they shouldn't be. They should all be, each level is kind of distinct in theme, and they just keep getting deeper and changing theme as you go down. A bowling alley makes no sense if it's like the 7th floor of a castle dungeon. That doesn't make any sense, especially underneath a cavern filled with giant fungi. It doesn't make any sense. But mythic underworld doesn't have to make sense. At least that is my understanding of what we mean when we talk about mythic underworld stuff. Now I'm going to leave, like I said, the sample dungeon for another time. But we have here a map and the key right here. So, in laying out your dungeons, keep in mind that downward and upward mobility is desirable, for players will not find a game enjoyable which confines them too much. On the other hand, unusual areas and rich treasures should be relatively difficult to locate, and access must be limited. The layout of a level will affect the route, most often followed by players. Observation of the most frequently used passages and explored rooms will guide the referee in preparation of successive levels, which of course should be progressively more dangerous and difficult. So they're saying if however you put the rooms and passages is going to determine what kind of freeways, if you will, the players are going to use when they're trying to go back down. So, for example, if we're looking at this here, this cross section, say you're a party of players and you're trying to get from the 1st floor down to the 5th floor because that's where you left off and you just left to get back to town to restock or whatever. You're going to have, by this point, come down the dungeon a whole bunch of times, and you'll have certain routes that you're going to want to take that you'll just become accustomed to being the usual route all the way down. You come down the stairs here, this eastern set of stairs, go down this chute, go down this chute, and there there you are on the 5th floor. You're going to kind of develop that path of least resistance over time. And, based on the layout of the rooms on each level, you're going to determine that freeway or that highway down the stairs to where they're trying to go. Of course, the GM or Dungeon Master can restock the dungeon, which will pretty significantly mess up the party. And I'm a fan of that kind of thing. But, to each their own. Tricks and traps. Besides those already indicated on the sample level, there are a number of other easily added tricks and traps. The fear of death, its risk each time, is one of the most stimulating parts of the game. It therefore behooves the campaign referee to include as many mystifying and dangerous areas as is consistent with a reasonable chance for survival, remembering that the monster population already threatens this survival. For example, there is no question that a player's character could easily be killed by falling into a pit 30 feet deep or into a shallow pit full of poisonous snakes, and this is quite undesirable in most instances. Here are a few simple items which can be included. False stairs, either up or down. Steps which lead to a slanting passage so the players may actually stay on the same level, descend 2 levels, or ascend 2 levels. Trap steps which lead up a short distance but then go downwards for at least 2 levels, with the return passage blocked by bars or a one-way door. Intra-level teleportation areas so that a player will be transported to a similar or dissimilar area on the same level, possibly activated by touching some item, such as a gem, door, or the like. Sinking rooms, including rooms which seem to sink, while the doors remain shut fast for a period of several turns. Illusion, mind control, and gaze rooms. Sections which dead end so as to trap players being pursued by monsters. Doors which are unopenable from one side only, which resist opening from one side or which appear at random intervals. Natural passages and caverns which have varying width and direction so that it is virtually impossible to accurately map such areas. Space distortion corridors or stairs which seem larger or shorter than they actually are. So he's listed here a whole bunch of tricks and traps that you could use. So we can kind of learn a little bit about dungeon design and how they would play back then just from seeing what he has to say. So, false stairs up or down. What's the penalty for taking false stairs on accident? I would say it's probably lost time. Your torch is going to burn out a little bit longer if you walk up these stairs and it ends up as a dead end, Steps which lead to a slanting passage. It seems like the point here is that you can accidentally end up in a level far beyond your abilities. So I have not mentioned it yet, but back in these days, I think it's pretty well known that the levels of a dungeon corresponded generally with the level of party that should go there. So the first level dungeon was made for a first level party. Second level of a dungeon was made for a second level party. And so on. So if you took a chute and it accidentally took you all the way from the 2nd floor to the 5th floor, and you didn't realize that that's how far down you went, you would end up in a really bad situation where you are fighting monsters that are way stronger than you. Especially if, as you say, the return passage is blocked. If you can't go back up that way, then you have to quickly find a way back up through another route, and that's going to be a whole pain. Teleportation stuff is going to really disorient the players, especially the mapper. If you're having the players map by hand, it's totally going to ruin them. It's going to mess them up like crazy to use teleportation stuff, unless it's very, very obvious. I know in, I believe, one of these sample dungeons, I don't think it was this one. I don't remember which one it is. It might be in a different rule book. There is a teleportation room where it teleports you to an identical room that's like rotated 90 degrees and it's a little bit to the southwest. So you'll be super confused if you're mapping accurately when you open the door and there's like a different hallway. So this is all to kind of mess up the mapper. and get you guys lost. Let's see, sinking rooms. I mean, I guess this would probably be similar to the slanting passages that send you multiple levels, or it could just get you stuck in an area and then you die by starvation or something. Illusion stuff. I am a huge fan of this. I have not seen players use illusion magic super well in any of my games yet, but I can kind of teach them by having illusion magic in the dungeon, or have NPCs use illusion magic that can really mess them up. Imagine seeing, a giant wall of flames, and then learning that it's just an illusion. At a certain level, magic users can create pretty significant illusions without that much of an effort, and it can really freak out some NPCs or monsters or whatever. So sections with dead ends to trap players being pursued. That obviously shows there's some sort of pursuit mechanic that would have been common back then. So I think that, if you're going to include this kind of thing, make it meaningful. Have the monsters chase them. If they're not going to chase the players, then there's no point in having dead ends. Other than, I guess, wasting time. Now, in my games, most of the time players don't actually run away from the monsters. And if they do, the monsters don't really have this chase scene where they're just going through this, hallway or something. But it could be taught, I think, if you have NPCs run away or something like that, and you show them that it's allowed. You're allowed to run away and not just fight to the death. Or if you have the monsters run away, do that. That could work. Doors, which are openable from one side only. So that obviously traps people at a certain point in the passage. Natural caverns and stuff like that is, again, to confuse mappers, and same with space distortion corridors. So you get into like non-Euclidean hallways that are like a mile long, but they only like take you 10 feet on the map or something. That kind of stuff totally messes up mapping. I am a huge advocate of mapping on paper. I don't like using virtual tabletops and battle maps and that kind of thing, because I think it really breaks a huge part of the game that I really enjoy. But once again, to each their own. If you don't like mapping that way, if you're more interested in a different style of play, that is totally acceptable as well. Distribution of monsters and treasure. As a general rule, there will be far more uninhabited space on a level than there will be space occupied by monsters, human or otherwise. The determination of just where monsters should be placed and whether or not they will be guarding treasure, and how much of the latter, if they are guarding something, can become burdensome when faced with several levels to do at one time. It is a good idea to thoughtfully place several of the most important treasures with or without monster guardians, and then switch to a random determination for the balance of the level. Naturally, the more important treasure will consist of various magical items and large amounts of wealth in the form of gems and jewelry. Once these have been secreted in out-of-the-way locations, a random distribution using a six-sided die can be made as follows. 1. Roll the die for every room or space not already allocated. A roll of 1 or 2 indicates that there is some monster there. The monsters can be selected by use of the monster determination and level of monster matrix, which is given later in this booklet. The number of monsters is best determined by the level being considered and the kind of monster inhabiting the room or space. The monster table from Book 2 can be most helpful here. Note that ochre jellies, black puddings, green slime, etc. are generally distributed normally, usually in passages without treasure. 2. Roll again for every room and space. A roll of 1 to 3 in those rooms or spaces with monsters in them indicates that some form of treasure is present. A roll of 1 in a room or space which is unoccupied indicates that there is some form of treasure there. 3. To determine the kind of treasure, use the following table. And then they give a table here where you cross-reference the level of the dungeon with how much treasure there would be on that level. So, the first level, there'd be D6 times 100 silver. There'd be D12 times 10 gold. And then there'd be 5% chance of having gems, 5% chance of having jewelry, and 5% chance of having a magic item. Sorry, actually, this would be a D6 times 10 gold, not D12. And then as you go down deeper and deeper, you will have a higher chance of getting more treasure. And then you see here, it says that silver will always be in the treasure. Gold will be in the treasure 50% of the time. Gems and jewelry will be in the treasure as indicated by the percent given. And magic items will be in the treasure as indicated by the percent given. So I am to assume that if you roll, if you make this roll for gems, there's, I guess, there's a D6 worth of gems. There's, maybe 4 gems or 3 gems or pieces of jewelry and so on. And then the determination for the value of those gems and jewelry, that is in book 2. I always have a hard time remembering the value of those things. Unguarded treasures should be invisible, hidden behind a secret door or under the floor, locked in hard-to-open strong boxes with poison needles or deadly gas released when they are opened. There are many variants of the above possible, and many other types of protection which can be devised. So even though they're unguarded doesn't mean they're not, secured in some way. They could just be in a pile, I guess, but more likely they're hidden somehow or trapped. Maintaining freshness. As monsters inhabiting the rooms, spaces, and corridors of a level are killed or captured, the level will become drab and dull. Coupled with this problem, players will have made fairly accurate maps of the level, so it will be challengeless this way also. Remembering that egress to lower levels is desirable, one must nevertheless revamp worn levels by one or more of the several methods suggested below. 1. Make minor alterations with eraser and pencil, blocking passages, making new ones, dividing rooms, and filling in others. 2. Extend the boundaries of the map, if not already filled to the edges of the paper according to corridors and rooms. 3. Place monsters in new areas as well as those less frequented old areas where monsters were located and removed sometime previously. 4. Reverse directions on the map, carefully relocating ways down to lower levels so as they still correspond to markings below, and do the same for passages upward. 5. Add a passage which continues past the established boundary of the level, creating a split or sublevel which it leads to, complete with new treasure and monsters. Using these suggestions and whatever else you dream up, there is no reason why participants in the campaign should not continue to find mystification, enjoyment, excitement, and amusement in the challenge of the myriad passages of the dungeons. So it seems like these 5 methods here are different dungeon restocking ideas. But it's not just putting more monsters in there, it's more than that. And I think this kind of gets into what I was talking about earlier with the mythic underworld. So, like I said, in the mythic underworld, dungeons are sentient. They're not just dead stone areas. They can change themselves. It says, like, number 1, it says make minor alterations with eraser and pencil, blocking passages, making new ones, dividing rooms. This seems totally interesting to me. I mean, I've never done this, but I would love to. It seems like the idea would be the dungeon is changing itself. The passages are moving around. That hallway that you thought led to the stairwell, well, now it leads to another monster. Or it leads to a completely different room than you remember it. And it makes it feel like the dungeon hates you, which is a common trope in the OSR. I think it's really interesting. Extending the boundaries of the map. So this one, I think, obviously, if your players have found their highway, if you will, down to the next floor that they're trying to get to, there's no reason for them to take new paths or check out old areas on the extremities of the dungeon. So I think this one relies upon you doing the first method first. So you got to make it so that the passages lead you to the edges of the map that they've already explored, but now there's new openings. And number 3, replacing monsters. This is probably the most well-known and understood dungeon restocking method. So, maybe you killed all the goblins, maybe more goblins show up. But more interestingly, maybe you killed all the goblins and maybe now mummies show up. Whatever you want. I mean, it keeps it fresh, Reversing directions on the map seems very, very strange. I totally... seems very intensive. This seems like a crazy mode, to do it. And they say just as long as you're keeping the stairs in the same places, basically, then you're fine. But otherwise, flip the dungeon over. Maybe literally flip your page of graph paper or whatever. And then 5, adding passages to new sub-levels. I think this is kind of just this very similar to 1 and 2, but I think if you're designing dungeons with graph paper, you're going to use a new piece of graph paper for this. I think that's the idea. The move/turn in the Underworld. In the Underworld, all distances are in feet, so whatever distances are given in inches, convert them to tens of feet. Movement, distances given in Book 1, is in segments of approximately 10 minutes. Thus, it takes 10 minutes to move about 2 moves. 120 feet for a fully armored character. 2 moves constitute a turn, except in flight/pursuit situations where the moves or turn will be doubled and no mapping allowed. Time must be taken to rest, so 1 turn every hour must be spent motionless, and double the rest period must be taken after a flight or pursuit takes place. Time spent searching for anything, secret passages, hidden treasure, etc., loading treasure, listening, ESPing, hiding, will be adjudicated by the referee as to what portion of a turn will be used by the activity. Typically, ESPing will take about a quarter of a turn, while searching a 10-foot section of a wall for secret passages will require a full turn. Melee is fast and furious. There are 10 rounds of combat per turn. Secret passages are located on a roll of a 1 or 2 on a 6-sided die by men, dwarves, and halflings. Elves will be able to locate them on a roll of 1 to 4. At the referee's option, elves may be allowed the chance to sense any secret door they pass, a 1 or 2 indicating that they become aware that something is there. Generally, doors will not open by turning the handle or by push. Doors must be forced open by strength. A roll of 1 or 2 indicating the door opens, although smaller and lighter characters may be required to roll a 1 to open doors. There can be up to 3 characters attempting to force open a door, but this will disallow them rapid reaction to anything awaiting them on the other side. Most doors will automatically close despite the difficulty in opening them. Doors will automatically open for monsters unless they are held shut against them by characters. Doors can be wedged open by means of spikes, but there is a 1/3 chance, a die roll of 5 to 6, that the spike will slip and the door will shut. Traps are usually sprung by a roll of 1 or 2 when any character passes over or by them. Pits will open in the same manner. When characters come to a door, they may listen to detect sound within. Note that undead never make any sound. A roll of 1 for humans and 1 or 2 for elves, dwarves, or halfling will detect sounds within if there is any to be heard. A good referee will have noise corridors, moaning, clanking, etc., and rooms from whence come shuffling or muttering sounds. In the Underworld, some light source or an infravision spell must be used. Torches, lanterns, and magic swords will illuminate the way, but they will also allow monsters to see the users so that monsters will never be surprised unless coming through a door. Also, torches can be blown out by a strong gust of wind. Monsters are assumed to have permanent infravision as long as they are not serving some character. While some referees allow fireballs and lightning bolts to be hurled into confined spaces, blasting sections of stone equal to the remainder of their normal shape, it is suggested that the confined spaces cause these missiles to rebound toward the sender. That is, a lightning bolt thrown down a corridor 40 feet long will rebound so as to reach a stated length of 6 inches, that is 60 feet underground, and this will mean the sender is struck by his own missile. It may also be compromised, allowing, say, 2 feet of stone wall to be destroyed, allowing 1 foot of stone destroyed for every 10 feet the space is short of full distance, and rebounding the missile 1/2 the distance short. Okay, so here there's a whole bunch of rules about the procedure of dungeon exploration. And again, they're just calling it the Underworld, not a dungeon, because I think there's this idea that the dungeon is not just a dungeon, but it's the sentient kind of thing. You can see that they'd established these turns, 10-minute turns, and you can do two movements to move. So 120 feet. So if you're moving 6 inches, remember each inch is 10 minutes because they're using these battle maps and grids from wargaming. You can move 120 feet. But they say that there's all these different things that take up lots of time, listening, looking for treasure, loading it, whatever. That all takes time, and the referee will decide how much time is taken. And then you have to rest every hour, spend 1 turn per hour. And I've never seen this before, but you have to take 2 turns of rest after a flight or pursuit. That is definitely interesting. They also established the term rounds for combat, and then secret passages here. So actually, I think this is interesting because they establish a resolution mechanic in this section. So they say secret passages will be located on the roll of a 1 or 2 on a 6-sided die. So this shows there's a 1 in 2 chance of detecting secret passages. And it establishes that low rolls are good for players. And later we see, you can change the range of success. So elves get 1 to 4. And then later you see that doors can be wedged shut, but there's a 1 in 3 chance that is rolling a 5 or 6 on a 6-sided die that it'll slip. So high numbers seem to be disadvantageous for players. So it seems like there's some inklings of resolution mechanics that are being set up here. And I think you can kind of suss out what the authors were thinking when they were designing it. So another way that I might use some resolution mechanics would be, instead of doing classic strength checks where you're rolling a d20 under the score, maybe you have an X in 6 chance. Maybe you have a 3 in 6 chance of succeeding something. But if you have above average strength, then you have a 4 in 6 chance or something like that. That might be just how I would do it. And then they give some rules about listening, noting that undead never make a sound. That is one thing that is interesting about them. And saying that you gotta add sounds in your dungeon. You gotta really add some sensory details, I think. I can extrapolate to make it easier for players to make decisions. Don't just leave, don't just say you can go left or you can go right, but make it so that there's information to go off of. To the left you hear some rattling chains, and to the right it's silent, but you smell the smell of death. Then you can kind of make a decision. Do we chance it with this living clanking chains thing, or are we gonna go where people have clearly died but we don't hear anything? Makes it more interesting of a choice, other than just left or right. It's just a coin toss, that situation. And then we see there's stuff about monsters and their vision. So they can see in the dark, permanent infravision, as long as they're not serving some character. So it seems like if you make a pet out of a monster, it loses its intra. So it seems like if you make a pet out of a monster, it loses its infravision. So that is totally weird. I mean, all this stuff here is kind of hinting at that mythic underworld stuff where there's doors that automatically close. They are stuck, except monsters can just automatically open them easily. Sometimes there's sounds that might not have an actual source, and monsters can lose their infravision. That's just weird, Also, it says that gusts of wind can just blow out torches. That is not something that makes any sense in, an underground setting where there's no wind. But in a mythic underworld, it does make sense. And then there's this rule here of bouncing, rebounding magic stuff. I don't know. I would tend to just ignore that if it was me, but I could see it being useful in some situations, I guess. Underworld monsters. Sighting monsters. Players will see monsters at 20 to 80 feet. Roll a pair of d4s to determine the distance, unless they are surprised by the monster. Surprise. The condition of surprise can only exist when one or both parties are unaware of the presence of the other. Such things as ESPing, light, and noise will negate surprise. If the possibility for surprise exists, roll a d6 for each party concerned. A roll of 1 to 2 indicates the party is surprised. Distance is then 10 to 30 feet. Surprise gives the advantage of a free move segment, whether to flee, cast a spell, or engage in combat. If monsters gain surprise, they will either close the distance between themselves and the characters, unless they are intelligent and their prey is obviously too strong to attack, or attack. For example, a wyvern surprises a party of 4 characters when they round a corner into a large open area. It attacks as it is within striking distance, as indicated by the surprise distance determination, which was a 2, indicating the distance between them was but 10 feet. The referee rolls a pair of d6s for the wyvern and scores a 6, so it will not sting. It bites and hits. The wyvern may attack once again before the adventurers strike back. Wandering monsters. At the end of every turn, the referee will roll a d6 to see if a wandering monster has been encountered. A roll of 6 indicates a wandering monster has appeared. The direction of appearance is determined by random number generation, considering the number of possible entries. Distance and surprise are decided in the usual manner. The kind of monster is determined on the table below. For wilderness encounters, an entirely different table will be used. And then here we see there is a chart for which table to consult. So we see if you roll a 1 or 2, when you're on level 1, you're going to roll on the level 1 wandering monster table. And there's 8 entries here. If you roll a 3 or 4, you're going to roll on the level 2 table. And if you roll a 5, you roll on level 3. And if you roll a 6, you roll on level 4 table. And they all have different numbers of entries. So level 1 has 8 entries, level 2, 3, and 4 each have 10 entries. And include such things as goblins and kobolds on level 1, zombies and conjurers on level 2, heroes, swashbucklers, magicians on level 3, wraiths, ogres, myrmidons, and white apes on level 4. And we got level 5 and 6 as well, which can be on deeper levels of the dungeon. And those include their own monsters. But we can see that, again, rolling high on a d6 usually indicates something bad for the party. So in this circumstance, rolling a 6 is what means that wandering monsters appeared. And then it gives here another list of some monsters you can consider adding to your dungeon. Number of wandering monsters appearing. If the level beneath the surface roughly corresponds with the level of monster, then the number of monsters will be based on a single creature, modified by type, that is, orcs and the like will be in groups, and the number of adventurers in the party. A party from 1 to 3 would draw the basic number of monsters. 4 to 6 would bring about twice as many, and so on. The referee is advised to exercise his discretion in regard to exact determinations, for the number of variables is too great to make a hard and fast rule. There can be places where 300 hobgoblins dwell, but how many can come abreast down a typical passage in the dungeons? Allow perhaps 3 in a 10-foot wide passage, and the balance will either be behind the front rank or fanning out to come upon the enemy by other routes. The most fearsome man or monster can be overwhelmed by sheer numbers of smaller or weaker creatures, provided the latter are able to close. Avoiding monsters. Monsters will automatically attack and or pursue any characters they see, with the exception of those monsters which are intelligent enough to avoid an obviously superior force. There is no chance for avoiding if the monster has surprised the adventurers and is within 20 feet, unless the monster itself has been surprised. If the adventurers choose to flee, the monster will continue to pursue in a straight line as long as there is not more than 90 feet between the two. When a corner is turned or a door passed through or stairs up or down taken, the monster will continue to follow if a 1 or 2 is rolled on a 6-sided die. If a secret door is passed through, the monster will follow only on a roll of 1. Distance will open or close dependent upon the relative speeds of the two parties, men according to their encumbrance and monsters according to the speed given on the monster table in Book 2. In order to move faster, characters may elect to discard items such as treasure, weapons, shields, etc. in order to lighten encumbrance. There is a 25% chance that any character surprised by a monster will drop some item. If he does, roll for the possibilities, remembering that only these items held could be so dropped. Burning oil will deter many monsters from continuing pursuit. Edible items will have a small likelihood, 10%, of distracting intelligent monsters from pursuit. Semi-intelligent monsters will be distracted 50% of the time. Non-intelligent monsters will be distracted 90% of the time by food. Treasure will have the opposite reaction as food, being more likely to stop intelligent monsters. Random actions by monsters. Other than in pursuit situations, the more intelligent monsters will act randomly according to the results of the score rolled on 2d6s. 2 to 5 is a negative reaction, 6 to 8 is an uncertain reaction, and 9 to 12 is a positive reaction. The dice score is to be modified by additions and subtractions for such things as bribes offered, fear, alignment of the parties concerned, etc. So there's a lot that we just covered here. I think what's interesting to point out is, there are some areas where as many as 300 hobgoblins can be. I think the idea is that there's layers. Monsters can have layers that they all reside in, and this is like where all the hobgoblins in the area come from. I don't think it would be wise for parties to confront a group of 300 hobgoblins without a significant, army they're dealing with. It seems like this could be a holdover from the wargaming undertones of Dungeons & Dragons, where you might legitimately have a mass combat of 300 hobgoblins versus all the hirelings and mercenaries that the party has hired. So this seems kind of vestigial if you're not using those rules in your game, but I do totally think there should be layers with lots and lots and lots of certain kinds of monsters. I've even made so many as 36 white apes, for example, in a layer before, and you could totally put more. I just don't think that is reasonable to expect combat out of that kind of thing. I do think numbers like this could be used to teach your players that there's other things in combat you can do with these creatures. You don't have to always go straight to combat when you see a monster. And then here we see there is all these rules about whether monsters will surprise you or flee from you or whatever, and what happens with pursuit. So clearly encumbrance and speed are balanced against one another, and you need to drop items to run away faster. So if I was GMing a pursuit, I would tell players, you are running away from these goblins, but because of all the treasure you're carrying, it's too heavy and you're not able to run away fast enough. And make them decide what are you going to throw away to try and run away faster. And it's up to them. They can figure out all sorts of different solutions. Here they suggest, oil to burn, or food or treasure. And it also says here there's a 1 in 4 chance of you dropping an item if you're surprised by a monster. So that definitely sucks. And then here it's got an example of play, which is quite interesting. I am not going to read this out right now, but I think when I read the sample dungeon, I will read out this example of play as well. The wilderness. The so-called wilderness really consists of unexplored land, cities and castles, not to mention the area immediately surrounding the castle, ruined or otherwise, which housed the dungeons. The referee must do several things in order to conduct wilderness adventure games. First, he must have a ground-level map of his dungeons, a map of the terrain immediately surrounding this, and finally a map of the town or village closest to the dungeons, where the adventurers will be most likely to base themselves. Blackmoor is a village of small size, a one-horse town, while Greyhawk is a large city. Both have maps with streets and buildings indicated, and players can have town adventurers roaming around the bazaars, inns, taverns, shops, temples, and so on. Venture into the Thieves' Quarter only at your own risk. The terrain beyond the immediate surroundings of the dungeon area should be unknown to all but the referee. Offhand adventures in the wilderness are made on the outdoor survival playing board, explained below. Exploratory journeys, such as expeditions to find land suitable for a castle or in search of some legendary treasure, are handled in an entirely different manner. Outdoor survival has a playing board perfect for general adventures. Catch basins are castles, buildings are towns, and the balance of the terrain is as indicated. Okay, so we're getting into wilderness stuff here. So it's important to understand that outdoor survival is a different game, that they're basically just kind of saying import the board for that game and just translate all the different stuff for your game. So, for example, they're saying anything that's a catch basin, that's a castle. Buildings are just towns, and etc. I think it's interesting how they talk about the wilderness area. They're saying that you kind of have to map out the town and prep out all the ground levels of the dungeons in the area, and have all this stuff prepped out. I have never prepped that much, and I've only ever prepped that much back when I used to play 5th edition, and I always was disappointed by not everything being used. So this is not my philosophy these days. These days I only prep what is necessary and what players actually want to use. So I kind of do things on the fly a lot more, and I find that my cities are a lot more interesting because of it anyway. So I don't know. I wouldn't say to prep every single thing, like mapping out your city. I've never done that in a long, long time. But I can see the value of it if you're doing an urban adventure or something like that. Definitely, though, I would have maps of dungeons. I would not kind of leave that up to chance, unless you're just gonna randomly make up a dungeon on the fly, which I would not advise. I would not advise that. So let's continue seeing what they have to say about each of these things here. Castles. As stated, the pawns indicate castles. The inhabitants of these strongholds are determined at random. Occupants of these castles will venture out if a party of adventurers passes nearby. If passing over the castle hex, there is a 3 in 6 chance that they will come out. If 1 hex away, there is a 2 in 6 chance they'll come out. And if 2 hexes away, there's only a 1 in 6 chance. If the party is on the castle hex and hails the castle, the occupants will always come forth if the party is not obviously very strong and warlike. Patriarchs are always lawful, and evil high priests are always chaotic. All other castle inhabitants will be either hostile to the adventurers or neutral, depending on a d6 roll, 1 to 3 being hostile, 4 to 6 being neutral. Determine the occupant of a castle as follows. And then there's a table here where you roll d6 to find out, what is the occupant of a castle. Is it a lord? Is it a necromancer? Is it a superhero? And then you roll a d4 to see what kind of guards and retainers are in the castle, and you roll a d6 to see, which one there is. So for example, you might have a castle that is inhabited by a necromancer that has ogres as guards. And then here, this little 4 means that you'd roll a d4 to see how many ogres there are. I think it's pretty interesting. I like this. This is really cool. I never tried this, but I would totally like to. I think this makes a really interesting stronghold generation. Totally cool. I think it's so cool. And some of these creatures here even have heroes riding them. So that is super cool. Fighting men within castles will demand a jousting match with all passers-by of like class. Otherwise, it will demand a toll from 100 to 600 gold pieces from the party. If a joust takes place, use the rules from chainmail, the occupant of the castle will take the loser's armor if he wins, but if the character wins, the castle owner will host all in the party for up to 1 month, supply them 2 weeks of rations, and provide war horses if the party so requires. Magic users from castles will send passers-by after treasure by Gace if they are not hostile, with the magic user taking at least half of all treasure so gained, the magic user having first choice of magical items and automatically choosing miscellaneous magic, wands or staves, or rings in that order in preference to other items. Otherwise, the magic user will require a magic item from the passerby as toll, and if they have no magic items suitable for use, the magic user will require a toll of from 1,000 to 4,000 gold pieces. Clerics will require passersby to give a tithe of 10% of all their money and jewels. If there is no payment possible, the cleric will send the adventurers on some form of lawful or chaotic task under quest. Generally, evil high priests will simply attempt to slay lawful or neutral passersby who fail to pay their tithes. Guards. In addition to those men or monsters accompanying the castle residents, there will be a number of men aiding in defense. From 30 to 180 men will man the walls, one half of whom will be crossbow, armed light foot, and the balance will be heavy foot. Those castle residents who are accompanied by men or creatures capable of riding or able to make near equal speed will be mounted on horseback, as will their men be mounted. There is also a chance there will be others in the castle's party. And then has another table here to see whether there are fighting men, magic users, or clerics in the castles. So I think this is super interesting how they explain what different classes will do in a castle. So fighting men challenge you to a joust, magic users send you on a quest, and clerics will ask for a tithe. And if you appease them, they'll do something for you, and if you don't, they'll do something against you. Very interesting. I think this is all stuff I've never dealt with before, and I think I would totally love to try using it out. Referee's map is a wilderness map unknown to the players. It should be for the territory around the dungeon location. When players venture into this area, they should have a blank hexagon map, and as they move over each hex, the referee will inform them as to what kind of terrain is in that hex. This form of exploring will eventually enable players to know the lay of the land in their immediate area and thus be able to select a site upon which to build their castles. Castle building and its attendant requirements will be covered hereafter. Exploratory adventures are likely to be the most exciting, and their incorporation into the campaign is most desirable. Exploration by foot is at normal speed. Horse parties will travel at a speed of a draft horse, and exploration by air will be at half normal flying speed. And then you see here there's also some of these other kinds of vehicles, like a raft or a boat, which can move 15 hexes per day, but only 5 if it's in a swamp. And then here we have some flying creatures, like a dragon, griffin, Pegasus, and they move a certain number of hexes. It looks like a lot more hexes than the other ones. However, it says that exploration by air will be at half of flight speed. So if you're flying on a carpet, it says it goes 30 hexes, but I'm guessing it means that you're only going to go 15 hexes on a flying carpet. Large party movement. Parties numbering over 100, including pack or draft animals, will incur a 1 hex penalty. Parties over 1,000 incur a 2 hex penalty. So, all this being said, we're seeing some more implications here. So, personally, in my game, whenever I have a hex map, I don't tell my players that there's a hex map at all. I don't even give them hex paper. I just tell them generally what they see. There's mountains to the north and south, and a forest to the east and west, whatever. I don't let them know, okay, on this face of the hex, there's this. On this face of the hex, there's that. I figure all that stuff out myself. So hex maps are purely GM facing for me. But we also see here that it says parties numbering over 100 or 1,000 get only a penalty of 1 or 2 hexes. That is, I have never in my life played a game of D&D where there was over 100 party members, or let alone 1,000. This is clearly implying that you're going to do some war game type stuff where you've got tons and tons of soldiers and you're going to go raid a castle or something. I have not played a game like this, and I would assume that most people who are in the OSR have not either. Terrain penalties. All terrain penalties are stated in Outdoor Survival. Mountains and swamps cost 3 movement per hex, crossing rivers at non-4 hexes also cost 3, and woods or deserts cost 2. Tracks through mountainous terrain cost 2 factors per hex moved, and tracks through woods or swamps incur no penalty of movement. Rest. All creatures must rest after 6 days of movement. Rest must be at least 1 full day. Exception. Dragons who travel for 3 weeks must sleep 1 full week if their mode of travel was walking, and they must sleep for 3 full weeks if their manner of travel was flight. Scale. Assume the greatest distance across a hex is about 5 miles. Turn. Each move will constitute 1 day. Each day is considered a turn. Wandering monsters. Sighting monsters. Players will see monsters at from 40 to 240 yards, inches convert to tens of yards for the wilderness, unless the monster has surprised the characters involved. Surprise. This is the same as in the Underworld, except the distance is from 10 to 30 yards, and if there are 3 or more monsters involved, they will have moved into a circle around the adventurers. Monsters at 10 yards distance will be able to attack. So that's interesting. If you get surprised by more than 3 monsters, they just surround you, which makes your life much harder. Lost parties. There's a chance of being lost, the chance depending on the type of terrain the party begins its turn upon. A lost party must move in the direction indicated by the die roll, 1 to 6, as shown in the Outdoor Survival rules and on that board, and make only one direction change from that direction. When exploring, the referee should indicate which direction the party is lost in. So it seems like you roll a d6 whenever you get lost, and you go one face. You go to the face that it's indicating rather than the one that you intended. Wandering monsters. At the end of each day, the referee will check to see if a monster has been encountered. The matrix below is for travel afoot or mounted. For travel afloat or in the air, 2 die rolls are made. A 5 on the first one indicates an adventure in the midpoint of the day with waterborne or airly monsters. A 6 on the second die roll indicates there is a normal adventure at the end of the day, and the table below is used. Exception. Ships which remain continually in water will roll but once daily for encounters, with a result of 6 indicating such an encounter. So here there is a pretty large wandering monster table, and it seems like you roll different tables depending on whether you're lost or not. I'm not entirely sure how to read this. So if you're like in clear terrain and you roll a d6, if you get a 1, you're lost. If you get a 6, you find an encounter. And then you roll a d8 to determine what kind of encounter, and this corresponds here with the terrain area as well, it seems. So if you're in a clearing, you can find men, flyers, giant, lycanthropes, animals, men, animals, or a dragon. Whereas if you're in a city, it's just men and undead. And there's different chances of rolling them. And then here we have all these different tables. Okay, these are all the different kinds of men. These are all different kinds of flyers, undead, and giants. And I would like to note that, they have here a desert on Mars as one of their potential settings. I think that's really cool. So we've got red Martians, yellow Martians, Tharks, dervishes, interesting stuff. And then the tables continue over here with lycanthropes, swimmers, dragons, and animals of different kinds. And I like how they talk about the dragon types. They include cockatrices, basilisks, and chimeras with dragons, which I've not really seen elsewhere. Notes. There will be from 2 to 12 men with any fighting man, magic user, or cleric encountered in the wilderness. They'll be from the 1st to 4th level of appropriate class. In addition, there will be other magical items they might have. So it seems like if you ever find a fighting man, there's going to be an entourage. If you find a cleric, there's going to be an entourage of hirelings and mercenaries that they've hired, as I guess they're assuming the players have been doing. And then it shows here a table of different magic items that those, adventurers might have. So it seems like being a fighting man, magic user, or cleric is a pretty big deal. You're like a hero if you are one of those things. But everyone else is pretty much just normal. So it's pretty interesting. Animals will generally be of the giant variety, although the referee might prefer to have small spiders, for example, which attack the party when they are asleep. Evading in the wilderness. Castle inhabitants will pursue on a roll of 1 to 3 if they are hostile to the party, and on a 1 if they're basically neutral. Evasion is the same as described below for monsters. Evading. This action is a function of the size of the party of adventurers and the number of monsters modified by surprise, terrain, and comparative speed. Use the following table as a guideline. So it's got this this table here where it says how many people you've got and how many monsters are encountered, and then what percent chance you have of evading. So basically, if you got a big party, you got a smaller chance of evading, especially if you're going against less monsters. Makes sense. If you got 100 people, you're probably going to get caught by, 1 or 2 goblins chasing you. 100 people are not very maneuverable, whereas 2 goblins can easily run around without giving directions to each other. Surprise by party means that evasion chances are doubled. Surprise by monsters negates all chance of evasion unless the party is able to use some form of magic or terrain is woods. Woods add 25% to evasion chances and give a 10% chance of evasion even if surprised. If the comparative speed of the 2 parties is such that one is at least twice as fast as the other, the faster will have the effect of increasing or decreasing evasion chances by 25%. This includes surprise situations. Pursuit. Pursuit will take place whenever it is so indicated with regard to castle inhabitants or when a party is unable to evade monsters. A die is rolled, the pursuit then goes in that random direction. If the monster is faster than the party involved, there is a 50% chance it will catch the party. The party now moves another hex in a random direction, and a die is rolled to determine if pursuit will continue. If pursuit continues, the chances for being caught by a faster monster are exactly the same, and the same procedure is repeated if the party is not caught. This procedure continues until pursuit is ended or melee occurs. Woods or swamp will reduce the chance of being caught by 25%. For each hex moved into pursuit, a party must spend 1 half day resting. Remember, a day equals 1 turn. During a day at rest, 2 dice are thrown for determining if wandering monsters are encountered, rather than but 1. So we've got all these pursuit rules. I think these are important. I've never had a pursuit in my games in the Overland, but it does seem like it would be really important to have these stuff start happening more often to make for more dynamic gameplay, especially if you've got some big armies. Construction of castles and strongholds. At any time a player or character wishes, he may select a portion of land or a city lot upon which to build his castle, tower, or whatever. The following illustrations are noted with the appropriate cost in gold pieces. Each player who builds should draw an extra set of plans and specifics for the referee. Surprises, intakings, sieges, and so on can take place. And this is a page that I love. It's got all these drawings of different pieces of a castle along with their costs. So, for example, a gatehouse costs 3,000, a portcullis and drawbridge costs 2,000 gold, and so on. A single wooden door costs 10, or double door is 15, and it all adds up to, this great castle. Now, I am not experienced enough with castles to know what all these things do, but I imagine if you're wargaming, this would all matter a whole lot. I don't know. I mean, it does seem very interesting. I just don't know how you'd actually use this stuff in here. For example, it says towers. To shorten 10 feet, you reduce by 10%. To add each 10 feet, it's increasing the cost by 20%, up from 30 grand. So, I mean, I don't know what kind of benefit 10 feet is going to do for your players. I'm assuming if you're wargaming and there's catapults and that kind of thing, then I think those things will matter. But I think for a more modern OSR game, it might just be more style points, and I would probably cut a lot of these, tactical considerations from it, and I would just charge players in a more crude way, I guess. But I do like how they say you can build castle, tower, or whatever. I think that this is pretty clearly a different tier of the game than the beginning. In OSR games, I think that This is what we're talking about when we say domain play. You get to a certain level where you can build a castle, and then it initiates domain level play, which is not something I think is particularly popular in the OSR these days. I think that domain play is more when you start just to retire. If you get to this level where you've built a castle, in my game, I would just say you can retire now, and that your character is going to become like a legendary guy in the world that can provide mentorship and legendary quests and stuff like that. He'll be a world renowned legend if you can build a castle with your money. Um, it doesn't say how long it takes to build this stuff, but I guess you can figure that out on your own. Um, I will say, in some of my other games, instead of building a castle or a stronghold, my players have opted instead to build a restaurant, for example, or turn dungeons they've cleared into theme parks. And I really, really like those solutions because they're flavorful and they're more interesting than just the vanilla, build a castle kind of thing. Um, but I mean, ultimately, it's the same kind of deal. You finish construction, and then you're at a different tier of play. Either you go on to like wargaming, or you can go and turn this into a restaurant management game, or you can just retire your character. But there's clearly a break when you get to this point, I think. Now, I will say you can continue for some time after you build your dungeon, after you build your castle, because you can hire specialists, and these specialists can really help you. So there's a number of specialists available to those in positions of power, that is, those with their own strongholds. The list is merely typical, and the referee can modify it as he desires. Alchemists cost 1,000 gold a month, armorers cost 100 gold a month, assassins, engineers, whatever. You can have all these different things hired to live in your castle, and they'll help you out with your quests, I imagine. So, for example, it says alchemists. Given a formula, the alchemist can duplicate it to make a similar potion at a cost of 1/2 the potion's value. Alchemists may conduct research, but the time and expense are twice that of a magic user, and they may only work on poisons. So, I mean, very interesting. These are super, super cool. You can totally use these to make your dungeon exploration better or your wilderness exploration easier as you wish. Armor. It is mandatory that there be one armorer for every 50 fighters in a player or character's employ in order to maintain the arms and armor of such men, elves, or what have you. An armorer can also make arms and armor, providing that he has no maintenance duties to perform. Unassisted, he can make 1 suit of armor, or 3 shields, or 5 weapons per month. With 2 assistants, 1 must be a smith, he can double this volume. And with 6 assistants, 2 must be smiths, the volume can be tripled. I don't know why it says trebled there. Weird. Assassin. The role of this hireling is self-evident. The referee will decide what chance there is of his mission being accomplished by noting the precautions taken by the intended victim. Assassins are not plentiful, and some limit on the number employable during any game year must be enforced. Animal trainer. Each animal trainer is capable of training but one kind of animal, and 1 is necessary to train any animal other than horses or mules, for example. Thus, if a player wishes to raise a herd of hippogriffs, a trainer is necessary. An animal trainer can handle about 6 animals. The length of time necessary to completely train the animals is up to the referee. Engineer. It is mandatory to hire an engineer to build any major stronghold or conduct a siege. Any tunneling must be supervised by an engineer. Sage. The sage can function only in an advisory capacity. They are employable only by fighting men. Depending on the willingness of the referee to become involved, there is no limit to the number of sages possible. Utmost discretion is required when the referee is acting in this role. Seamen. All ships must be manned by a crew of seamen under a ship captain. The number required is stated in the Naval Rules section herein. Generally, seamen will not be fighters, but those that are able to fight will receive pay as both a seaman and as a fighter according to their classification. Ship captain. A self-explanatory role. Smith. As already mentioned, a smith is able to assist an armorer. For every 50 horses or mules in player or character's force, there must be one smith to maintain them. Spy. There are 2 ways to acquire a spy. The spy can be hired and then await inclusion in the desired force, or he can be ordered to make himself available to this force. A spy can also be gained through corruption. In this latter method, the player or character desiring to acquire a spy in the enemy's camp offers a bribe to some member of that camp. If it is accepted, there is a very high probability of the spy then faithfully performing the duties thereafter. Chances are only determined by the referee. Information gained by any spy is also passed on by the referee. Men-at-Arms. Hired fighters can be men, dwarves, or elves. Chaotic characters may wish to employ orcs. Orc support and upkeep is only half that of a man. Men-at-Arms require support and upkeep as follows. And it's got a chart here, and it says basically the stronger kinds of people cost more to support. Dwarves, elves, orcs, etc. Obtaining specialists and men-at-arms. In order to hire either of these classes of persons, it is necessary to do one or both of the following. Either post notices in conspicuous places stating that positions open and who is offering such employ, or have servitors circulate in public places, seeking such persons as are desired. The weekly cost of either method is from 100 to 600 gold pieces. The referee must determine the probability of success of the attempt based on the generosity of the offer made, and so on. Elves and dwarves are not common, and specialists are even less so. Rumors, information, and legends. Such activity as advertising will certainly gain the notice of the locals and begin a chain of rumors. So will almost any other unusual activity. Even the departure of a party from a town is likely to be noticed. Obtaining such news is usually merely a matter of making the rounds of the local taverns and inns, buying a round of drinks, 10 to 60 gold pieces, selling the barman a few coins, 1 to 10 gold pieces, and learning what is going on. Misinformation is up to the referee. Legends will be devised by the referee as the need arises, but they are generally insinuated in order to lead players to some form of activity or warn them of a coming event. Player character support and upkeep. Players and characters must pay gold pieces equal to 1% of their experience points for support and upkeep until such time as they build a stronghold. If the stronghold is in a wilderness area, all support and upkeep costs then cease, but if it is in a village or town not controlled by the player or character, then support and upkeep payments must continue. Baronies. Another advantage accruing those who build their strongholds in the wilderness is they will gain control over the surrounding countryside. Clearing the countryside of monsters is the first requirement. The player or character moves a force into the hex, the referee rolls a die to determine if there is a monster encountered, and if there is one, the player or character's force must remove it. If no monster is encountered, the hex is already cleared. Territory up to 20 miles distant from a stronghold may be kept clear of monsters once cleared, the inhabitation of a stronghold being considered as sufficient to maintain the monster-free status. Within each territory, there will be 2 to 8 villages of from 100 to 400 inhabitants each. This populace will bring in annual tax revenue of 10 gold pieces each. The referee may also allow various investments in the territory, adjudicating revenue according to the investment and area potential. Some possible investments are road building, canals, inns, hunting, religion, armories, animal breeding, farming, fishing, exploration, shipbuilding, sea trade, land trade, trapping, and tourism. Successful investments will also have the effect of increasing the population of the investor's territory, providing the area of investment does not specifically preclude such. Hunting and trapping would do so, for example. Angry Villager Rule. Anyone who has viewed a horror movie is aware of how dangerous angry villagers are. Whenever the referee finds that some player has committed an unforgivable outrage, this rule can be invoked to harass the offender into line. Within the realm of angry villagers are thieves from the thieves' quarter, city watches, and militia, etc. Also possible is the insertion of some character like Conan to bring matters into line. Now, I'm a little bit wary about this angry villager rule here. I mean, it depends. I think it depends. If you're going to do it to curb player thought or player behavior, I think you're better suited just having a conversation with them. But if you're using it to kind of facilitate some in-world behavior, let's say you're constantly increasing the taxes or something, then it makes sense. And it's not like a player punishment, it's more of a character punishment. And I think that's fine. Other worlds. There should be no natural laws which are certain. Space could be passable because it is filled with breathable air. On the other hand, the stars could be tiny lights only a few hundred miles away. Some areas of land could be gates into other worlds, dimensions, times, or whatever. Mars is given in these rules, but some other fantastic world or setting could be equally as possible. This function is up to the referee, and what he wishes to do with it is necessarily limited by his other campaign work. However, this factor can be gradually added so that no burden will be placed upon the referee. I really like this, talking about, how your world functions, up to you, and what kind of worlds you can include, portals, that kind of thing. I like that stuff. So now what's left in this volume is basically just a bunch of combat rules. We've got, let's see, land combat, aerial combat, naval combat, and that seems about it. There is some last little bit here, which I'll read right now. Healing wounds. As noted previously, energy levels can only be regained by fresh experience, but common wounds can be healed with the passage of time or the use of magics already explained. On the first day of complete rest, no hit points will be regained, but every other day thereafter, 1 hit point will be regained until the character is completely healed. This can take a long time. Time. As the campaign goes into full swing, it is probable that there will be various groups going every which way and at all different time periods. It is suggested that a record of each player be kept, the referee checking off each week as it is spent. Reconcile the passage of time thus. Dungeon exploration equals 1 week. Wilderness adventure equals 1 move per day. 1 week of actual time equals 1 week of game time. The time for dungeon adventures considers only preparations and a typical 1-day descent into the pits. The time for wilderness expeditions would include days of rest and recuperation. Actual time would not be counted off for players out on a wilderness adventure, but it would for those sequestered in their dens, hidey holes, keeps, castles, etc., as well as for those in the throes of some expedition in the underworld. So I really like this time stuff here. Specifically, this 1 week of actual time equaling 1 week of game time. There's been some videos elsewhere describing this effect where, whenever you're not playing D&D, time is passing at real time for the players. This can provide an opportunity for NPCs and enemy factions to work toward their goals, and I really, really like it. Plus, that means that, you don't have to do time skips in your games to wait for your armor to be ready or whatever. It kind of justifies it. If you need, a breastplate and they say it's going to take 2 weeks to make or something like that, then you just wait 2 actual real life weeks before you can get that. And that's usually like 2 sessions. Easy stuff. I really, really like it. I think it's one of my favorite things that I've recently started doing, and I really recommend it. I'll also say that here it says something about lots and lots of different groups going all at the same time. I've heard about this stuff, in modern day. We kind of talk about Westmarch's game where there's like 50 players or something like that, and whenever a couple of them want to play, they just message the GM and say, hey, we want to go check out that dwarf mountain or something like that. And then the 2 of them or the 4 of them or whatever will just go on that adventure while the rest of the 50 people chill at the tavern or something. And then they return back to the tavern at the end of the session, and time passes as usual. I think it's pretty cool. Interesting stuff. I've never had enough players to run something like that, but I would love to do something like that eventually. Afterward, there are unquestionably areas which have been glossed over. While we deeply regret the necessity, space requires that we put in the essentials only, and the trimming will often have to be added by the referee and his players. We have attempted to furnish an ample framework, and building should be both easy and fun. In this light, we urge you to refrain from writing for rule interpretations or the like unless you are absolutely at a loss. For everything herein is fantastic, and the best way is to decide how you would like it to be, and then just make it that way. On the other hand, we are not loath to answer your questions, but why have us do any more of your imagining for you? Write to us and tell us about your additions, ideas, and what have you. We can always do with a bit of improvement in our refereeing. Fight on. And that brings us to the conclusion of the third volume of the OD&D rules. So, like I said, all that's pretty much left in these books is the spells from the first book, the entirety of the second book, which is Monsters and Treasure, and the combat rules for this third volume. We got, like we said, land, air, and naval combat. So I am not particularly interested in reading those combat rules because I think it pretty much gets into kind of wargaming type stuff. Talk about using figurines at a 20-to-1 ratio, and fantastic party members are going to do it a 1-to-1 ratio of their figurines or whatever. Not particularly my interest. It's not particularly my interest, but if you guys are interested in that, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I will read those. But I think for now, it seems like the next thing to do would be to do a comparative read of these spells. That is something I'd be very interested in. And just let me know what systems you'd be interested in me comparing. And if there's any interest in the monster comparisons, I would love to do that as well. But again, let me know what systems you're interested in comparing. As of right now, I'm just thinking this versus BX. I might throw an AD&D in there as well, but for now, I just like this as it is. So anyway, thank you very much for tuning in. Again, my name is Undead Waffle. I have a blog over at undeadwaffle.com, and you can check that out to see some of my articles and dungeons that I've designed. And feel free to subscribe if you like what I made, or leave a comment if you have any thoughts about what you've seen. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.